The next step, we have our particle asset. So we're going to go in and create a particle asset. When we want to create one of those, we're not going to do that through the assets or through the project and create. This is a game object type that we're creating. So we can either grab it from our game objects, create other particle system, or we'll go into our hierarchy and create from here. So we've got our particle system up. First thing we want to do is label it. Let's call this our explosion. So we have an explosion that we're going to be creating. If we zoom in, just F on the keyboard, frame this, and we can see that we've got, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my grid by changing my display mode. And we've got just a bunch of little particles being created, just some nice little soft spots coming in and out. What we want to do is make this look a little more like an explosion. We want it to push outward, and we want it to pop kind of quick. So let's go in and see what kind of properties we have inside the inspector. So with the explosion selected, and in the inspector, we can go in and find out, first and foremost, we've got our position. I like to usually try to set most of my objects at 0, 0, 0 inside of the world when I'm working on them. So I'm going to just reset my position first. And let's get a nice little view here for it. Let's go into our ellipsoid particle emitter rollout. Inside of this rollout, we've got a number of different properties that we can change. We can change the size of the object, how long the object lasts, basically the lifespan of the object, how many particles get emitted at one point or another. We can also change the velocity, so we can make this particle move around, and we can even change random velocities. We can rotate it. We can do one-shots and change up the ellipsoid, which is what the particles are being emitted from, change up the size of that piece. For us, for an explosion, something simple and something pretty straightforward, let's go ahead and start off by changing two properties in here. We're going to go into the size. We'll kind of work our way from the bottom back up. We're going to start off with the size of this ellipsoid. We're going to pull this in a little bit tighter. We're going to start in, let's say, at 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. You notice how all the particles start going in closer and closer and closer. So we're getting to a tighter little spot, and that's because we've changed the size of the emitter. Now if we were to change this, for instance, to a 10, 10, 10, then what have we done? We've spread that out a whole lot more. We've given a lot more space to the emitter, and it looks a little more maybe like a star field or something like that. Alright, well, let's go ahead and pull it back in tight. And with it tight, we're going to have it explode from here and push out. Now, what we're doing right now is just looping through this. They're being created, they're going away, they're being created, and they're going away. We want to do one shot. We want to come in here and have it just create them and then go away. Create them and go away. This way, our explosion looks like it kind of pops. It's just got the explosion coming out. Now, the other things we have, we've got velocity, world velocity, local velocity. This depends on the emitter itself. The world velocity says it's going to use the coordinate system of the world. The local velocity is going to use the coordinate system of our actual emitter. So depending on the direction that the emitter is facing is the direction it uses to move it. Now below that we've got the random velocity, so it randomizes a little bit, makes it nice if you've got lots of things happening as far as the same particle being used over and over and you want some randomness in it. And we've also got one called our tangent velocity. Now this is the one we want to take a peek at. We want our tangent velocity. So let's go in here and let's just play with some of the numbers. We've got x, y, z. They correlate with the x, y, and z on our axis here. Let's say we want to push these out. Let's see, if we're looking at this as our y, and I believe that's x. Let's give it a shot. Let's see what we do. Let's say 2. There we go. Look at that. So with one number, we're able to push out that object and give ourselves somewhat of an effect of an explosion. Well, let's see if we can add another direction here. If we add another direction, we're pulling it in a little bit. Let's see if we add one more direction. What kind of direction can we take it? Ah, there we go. So it looks like we have a nice little explosion, right? We're pushing things out. Now the next thing we do, if we go up a little bit more, we say, well, does it last too long? Does it need to happen faster? Well, we can go back up and say, well, we've got the minimax size. Right now it's a really small little particle. Let's say we bump this up a little bit. Let's say we take it to a 0.5, maybe up to a 1.5 for variation. At that point, we're a little bit big, so we can just tone that back down, maybe a 0.2, maybe a 0.75. So somewhere in that range, we're looking pretty good. Now the min energy and max energy is how long does that particle last when it gets created. It's the lifespan of that particle. So let's say we bump this down. Let's say 0.75 and 1.5. There we go. It's a little bit quicker. We could even bump that down even a little less. Say we take it to a 0.5 and a 1. There we go. So you can imagine clicking here and then something just popping and exploding right there. Okay, the next one is our min emission and max emission. This is just how many particles are going to be emitted, created with the particle. So if depending on the type of game or this, the platform that we're building this to, we may have to limit the number of particles that get created at one point or another. So it does give us that control where we could set in, let's say, only 15, between 15 and say 30, so that we're not creating too many. And that's going to do it for the min-max, for the energy, the size, and the emissions. We've got our tangent velocity looking pretty good. Maybe we can break that up just a little, about 2.5. There we go. And below that we've got some rotation. If we wanted it to rotate, we could add some random rotation and rotate the particles. You can see those being rotated as they get created. And below that, we've got our particle animator. So if we wanted to change the color of the particles as they're getting created, we could animate that color. So simply using just the color picker, we can select on our color animation from our array. It's just an array 0 to 4. We can select on just a different color. Let's say we want something that's like a bright yellow when it gets started. And then we can just continue on through. Continue to just select them, adjust and tweak the colors to whatever it is that you might want to do. There we go. Just some fun ones to play with. I would suggest right in here, take your time, play with the colors, try to make it something interesting. Notice too that we have a fade in and a fade out. So when you're dealing with the color on the color picker, this is the alpha channel below that little black and white line right there. The alpha is controlled right here. So it's saying that it's going to start off just about completely faded. If we wanted to have it start completely visible when it starts, we can move it all the way over. And this is just how far is it going to transition. It's going to come in, go all the way, and then fade back out. And that's how you control how it fades in and out. Okay, that's going to give us enough for the color right in there. The other options we've got some rotational options we don't need to worry about. And then we also have some size grow options. We can have it grow across time for the lifespan of it. So we could go in and say, let's have it grow 2. And each particle is just going to increase its size by 2 by the end of it. We've got our random force and our dampening. Our dampening we could always slow down a little bit. It's pulling the particle in. We can speed that up. We push that particle out a lot faster. And for us, we're actually going to pull it in just a little bit. Let's say to about a 0.25. Like nice even numbers like that. Okay. Gets us a nice little pop. Has a nice little soft fade at the end of it. The last rollout that we have, the particle renderer. We're casting shadows, receiving shadows. We don't really need those checked on. We'll go ahead and just leave them since they're default though. We have one option for a material. And by default, we've got a default particle material. And that's just fine for us. We could load in our own explosion texture map if we wanted to. And then the last couple of options, we may not need them. We'll try it just to see what kind of effect we get. But instead of doing just a billboard, we can do a stretched particle. So we're going to go in and use our stretched option and see what kind of effect we get. You see how it stretches those particles? And if we want to change the length of that stretching, we can go into the length scale and increase that number. So if you were to click and get that effect, you could get that effect on it. Now this is where you could have multiple effects going at one time. One particle that has some of the debris that's being shot out, one that gives this nice sparkly kind of effect. There we go. Okay, so depending on how you want to take it, you can use the billboard, you can use the stretched, whatever it is that gives you kind of the effect you want to go for at this point in time. And just for the fun of it, we'll leave it on the stretched. Alright, so that gives us an explosion, and again, just like with the objects before, we need to create a prefab, and we're going to drop our explosion into that prefab. So back in the project, back to the create, to a prefab, and just so that we can have it grouped together nicely, we'll call this a prefab, and explosion. And then we can just drag our explosion over to it, drop it onto it. And that gives us our explosion prefab that we can use to work with and have explode when the player selects on an object. Okay, so that gives us the effect we need. We've got the explosion, we've got our script files ready for us to start scripting on, and we've got our enemies for us to start selecting on. So the assets at this point are almost all created except for the audio files, and the audio files we'll do next.